I was never prepared for that news. I mean, because in the ditch, it just never occurred to me to try and move. The pain was so bad. But I never, ever expected to hear the word spinal cord injury.
Those words are not ones you ever want to hear. Spinal cord injury. Long-time listeners to Curveball know that these words were once uttered to me by my husband after an accident in Turkey, and these were the days before mobile phones, so it was all rather dramatic. Thankfully, things turned out okay for us in the long run, but it was certainly one of those how the heck did we end up here moments. Mark Berridge also ended up with a fractured vertebrae after a shocking bike accident catapulted him through the air and down an embankment. Before the accident, Mark Berridge had spent most of his working life as an experienced negotiator in the mining industry, a career that's taken him from Australia to Hong Kong, Singapore and the US. So making data-driven decisions and working out where to concede ground is all in a day's work for him. How far to push, when to pull back. These negotiation and risk assessment skills came in pretty handy following the long nights in a hospital bed and the long road to recovery. Mark Berridge, welcome to Curveball.
Thank you, Kelly.
You spent your childhood in a town outside of Perth, and it was a pretty creative, get your hands dirty kind of household. Tell me about some of the things that your parents encouraged you to do when you were little.
I think my mum in particular was just so artistic. And so she had everything, between spinning wheels and looms and pottery wheels. So, as kids, we'd be involved in all those things. We'd do all these amazing things inside the kitchen, inside the house or in the shed. But I think I most of all remember getting recruited to help on the gardening projects. My parents were school teachers and we moved house a number of times. And with each move, there would be the desire to set the house up for future parties, which would include my mum designing where the gardens were going to go and where the new paving would go. So we'd head off to the tip and we'd get all these old bricks from the tip. We'd scavenge the bricks and then Dad would have to chip off the cement and cut them to the right angles. And Mum would have these intricate designs, mainly with arcs, because you couldn't have anything boring, right? So poor Dad had to work out how to fit all these things together, and we'd be recruited to help with all of this labour all the way through from the getting the good bricks at the tip to putting them in the ground and helping when Dad was putting up the pergolas, and then finally the gardens. And there was always a water feature to be put in, some pond, and then the piping for that. And so I think through a number of houses we had that sort of adventure, no more so than in Rollystone, which is in the hills of Perth, which is the strongest memory I have of that particular event. But we did it multiple times.
This sense that you can tackle any problem that you put your mind to just stayed with you into the start of your career. So after university, you start a career with Rio Tinto. You go from living in that small town in Western Australia to running international operations quite quickly. What was that like?
I went through a commerce degree and wasn't sure where I'd end up, get picked up at Rio Tinto. And my first job is running these ships, and I cost 30,000 Australian dollars per year, and the ships cost 30,000 US dollars per day. So all I've got to do is find a way to save a day. And I've saved more than my salary, and they're going to start noticing, and I might get further up the chain. So, I just loved that, that problem solving, and had some great moments, some not so great moments. There was one time I nearly made a massive ship, and these ships are like, 3 times the size of a football field, 300 metres long, 50 metres wide. Nearly had it run out of fuel crossing the Indian Ocean, going around the Cape of Good Hope, because I decided we could save money by fueling up on the west coast of Africa rather than in Japan, which was tendency. This master has rung me up and said, "Mate, you've just about made me run out of fuel here. This is not the way I'm crossing the high seas around the Cape of Good Hope." And I had to reach out to Richards Bay and find a way to get some fuel in there. And I kept my job, fortunately, and continued to find those opportunities to, maximise value, which was really a central part of that, finding a way to improve something. And I think that's very central to that creative curiosity both my parents had instilled in me.
Your career continues to pick up through the 90s. You stop running out of fuel along the way, which is great. But then you move with Rio Tinto to Hong Kong. How did your family react to that decision to move over there?
Yeah, I think my parents were excited for me overall, but at the same time, Hong Kong was about to transition back to full Chinese rule in 1997. I moved there in April 1996. So, yeah, I remember my mum saying to me just before I left, I'm going to give you all my gold jewellery, because I'm so worried something might go wrong and you might not be able to get out. And I did call up one of my friends and said, Mum said this, do you really think it's a risk? He was already there and said, no, it's, you're going to be fine. It's great. And it was, the most expansive period of my career overall, and emotionally amazingly rewarding. I ended up meeting my wife at the end of my time in Hong Kong as well, who's English, and just an amazing overall life experience.
And it wasn't the last time that you'd worked sort of in close proximity to China, and what a fascinating time to be there. Later, after you'd met your wife and you'd started your family, you'd actually kind of come back to Australia, etc. You moved to Singapore to set iron ore prices for Rio Tinto. That would have been obviously a very important role for Rio Tinto, but I imagine also quite a political one. It's a valuable export market. How stressful was that role?
I was concerned going into it, I think, from that, you're controlling $20 billion worth of revenue for Rio Tinto, and that had an amazing amount of value driven for the Australian economy overall. But also, Rio's revenue is only a tiny part of the overall purchasing of iron ore for China. And if I guess they see that the prices are unfair, you always felt you're at some level of risk. And there had been, a Rio Tinto employee unfortunately jailed in 2009. So I took up that role in 2012, and very conscious of, I guess, that potential political oversight. But just the most amazing role, had the most amazing team, and great opportunities to travel through the region and just deal with pressure. Like, I was constantly dealing with pressure.
So you're jet setting around the world, but eventually you come back to Australia, and like so many middle-aged businessmen, you're also into cycling. I think they call you mammals, middle-aged men in lycra. What do you like about cycling?
Well, I'd played hockey for most of my sporting career. My knees went, and I got into cycling a little bit before Singapore, and then coming home, I just thought, I've got to regain some weight control here, and cycling was going to be my way forward. And so I got back amongst my friends around me for cycling, and it was fitness, it was the sense of friendship amongst the guys, and I just loved the nature and the headspace of it. It was just my peaceful time mostly. I mean, I was relatively slow, so going up hills was never very peaceful for me, but I'd normally do about 250 Ks a week, and I just loved it. We have like a typical route called the River Loop, 37 Ks-ish from my house, and I'd probably do that 3 to 4 times, and then on Sunday we'd normally do a ride between 70 and 110 Ks.
So one morning in March in 2019, you decided to take a new route, I think for the first time, and that time of year is quite humid in Queensland, as you mentioned. But this particular morning was actually not that humid. It was quite comfortable and crisp. So what was the feeling when you got out on the bike that day?
It was just a beautiful morning, and we were going through Fig Tree Pocket. I think I'd ridden that route one time before, and it's a lovely area of Brisbane, going through a lot of tree-lined streets. So you had this beautiful dappled light coming down on me, like lovely morning sun, and I was about to fly to Salt Lake City for work that night. And I remember feeling like I'm a bit tired. Maybe I can just not go this morning, but I knew that I'd sleep better on the plane if I got out and exercised. I wanted to be with the guys, one last chance. One of my boys had had an epic cricket win the day before. It gave me an opportunity to talk about that with the guys. So I made the decision, I'm definitely going to get up and go despite being a little bit tired. And I just remember thinking, how blessed am I to be out here riding underneath the trees and having that dappled light on me. I remember feeling how lovely this was, and we're going uphill a little bit in Fig Tree Pocket Road, and I go past Dave, so I'm now 8th of 9th in our group, and then start coasting downhill, and then not long after that, things changed dramatically.
So you begin your descent, you're towards the back of the group. What happens?
So I'm going downhill about 40k an hour, and I'm watching Pip go through the corner just in front of me, and I feel like he's gone a little bit narrow in the corner, and I don't want to go that narrow, so I just drift about a metre wider to the left. And then my bike has hit what they call a shoved piece of road, like a sunken piece of road. But I don't know this. All I know is suddenly my front wheels bobbled and it's lost traction with the road as I'm just early in my corner, and I'm regained control of the bike. And then I'm thinking, all right, what are my options? And it's amazing just how the world slows down and how much you're processing information instantaneously, and it feels like it's taking so much longer in all these moments. And I'm, okay, I don't believe I can still make the corner. If I try and make the corner, I'm going to have an uncontrolled crash. What are my options? There's a park straight ahead. That's going to be my better option. Once I've regained control of the bike, it's trying to brake, knowing that I will go over the handlebars at the park, but thinking that's my best option. And I did go over the handlebars. I went over the handlebars pretty violently and flew quite high in the air. And what was unbeknownst to me was there was a stormwater drain 5 foot below ground level. So I've flown very high in the air and then come crashing down into the earth. One of the friends later sent me a text saying, you know, Barrow, Superman in training, because of the way I looked off the bike. And that's the way the guys were initially referring to it until the news of how I really was doing came through.
Once you hit the ground, are you conscious? Do you realise what's happened?
Oh, I've got no idea what's happened. I was conscious the whole way through, which I think was probably a good thing despite the pain. So yeah, I've flown through the air like Superman, one hand out in front. That left wrist has struck the ground first as I've cannoned down into the bottom of this ditch. And then the left side of my helmet's smashed into the ground and my left shoulder. So that fractured my left scapula. Thankfully, my helmet did an absolutely amazing job. Crushed 3 ribs and crushed 2 vertebrae. But I've got no idea of any of this. I didn't even know I was in the bottom of a ditch. I just knew I was on my side and the pain was just off the scale and I'm just struggling to try and breathe. Basically, I had enormous trouble at that point just keeping my breath, and my first focus became, how do I just slow down my thinking and how do I slow down my breath? And I guess coming back to those comments about living life under pressure, as I did as a negotiator at different stages, how do I slow down this situation, take control of those little things I can take control of?
What happens next? Your friends are there. They've witnessed this. What's the flurry of activity around you as you lie there?
Relatively unbeknownst to me, but they've called the ambulance immediately. It's funny, like that, I guess, however long that was, waiting for the ambulance, maybe about 20 minutes, just felt like an absolute eternity because of the pain. But it's the final minute or two when I could actually hear the thing. I could hear it coming, but it wasn't there. They were the worst 2 minutes.
It's interesting, isn't it? Your mind can kind of hang on. But then when you think, it's so interesting how the brain works. When you think, okay, I can sort of let go and give in here to the pain, and then it's still not here. So you're taken to hospital. The news isn't great when you get there. What was the verdict from doctors?
So I've had any number of scans as I arrived, more than 10, and a few hours later start getting the results of those scans. And I was never prepared for that news. I mean, because in the ditch, it just never occurred to me to try and move. The pain was so bad in the ditch. But I never, ever expected to hear the word spinal cord injury, and that I'd crushed 2 vertebrae, 1 to 40% of its original height. So if you think of it being about an ice cube size, a sugar cube size, broke off and went into my spinal cord. And that had meant that I had more than 50% compression of my spinal cord, which I later found out was closer to 80%. But on the day, they said more than 50%. And I think it was those words that shook me the most because, as you heard, I was a negotiator. I did a commerce degree. My understanding of biology was low, but
your understanding of statistics and percentages and chance is probably pretty high.
That helped. That really helped. And I think ignorance of biology helped in some ways as well. Like sometimes you can be more optimistic and more creative because you don't understand things. But I just really didn't understand quite how important my spinal cord was. But I was just going, well, if it's more than 50% compression, then maybe my legs have got 50% of the power. That more than 50% of my weight's in my top half of my body. that's going to be a struggle. And they certainly weren't painting a picture of someone that was going to have mobility. So it was a binary situation. You need to have an operation today as soon as possible, but certainly within 24 hours of the accident to have some hope of walking again. We don't know how strong that hope is, but you must have this operation. That's your first phase.
It's risky surgery though. Any surgery is risky, but spinal surgery, incredibly risky. So were you weighing up pros and cons, or was there just no choice?
Just no choice. You're so right, Kelly. If you had asked Mark Berridge prior to 10th March 2019, which part of his body does he not want operated on under any circumstances, I would have done any level of physio, anything but having back surgery, just because I suppose in my era you'd grown up hearing, lots of difficulty around that. But I never had the thought of, I'm not going to have this operation. The only moment I winced at all was signing the final disclaimer, where the disclaimer made it very clear that I might lose a degree of eyesight because of being face down for the operation for so long, and I'd always treasured my eyesight. And I think that was the only moment I've just thought about it, but it was never, ever a thought any other time that day. It was just, that's the first phase. That's what I've got to do.
And your wife, Lucy, has arrived at the hospital by that point. What's going through her mind? How's she dealing with all of this?
Well, I think she's angry at the boys because none of the boys came in the ambulance with me. And she says a woman would never do that. They would always have sent someone with you in the ambulance. And she was not sympathetic to my response was, well, at least they wheeled the bike to a place of safety so that it could be picked up later that day. She wasn't too fussed about that response. I mean, Lucy's just amazing. She'd been through bowel cancer herself 18 months before and just handled that so incredibly well. And I've never seen her shaken in any way, shape or form. And it always surprised me that she didn't really recall much of that briefing. It took 2 years, I think, before she confessed that she'd actually been so shaken by that moment of hearing the news that she'd had to push herself into the wall so as not to fall down. I think I got the good deal. I mean, it was a really tough day in hospital and, not dismissing just how awful it was. She's the one that has to drive home and tell the kids that she's been in hospital and the state of me.
Mark Berridge is my guest on Curveball. He's in hospital, his vertebrae is compressed, his spinal cord is severed. There's a lot of decisions about to be made by Mark. I'm Kelly Riordan, and this is Curveball, the show about thriving in challenging times. My guest is author Mark Berridge, someone who spent time as a leader and a negotiator for Rio Tinto until a rather nasty bike accident landed him in a really bad way. So, Mark, you decide to go into surgery. You come out the other side, but it's almost like that's only just the beginning. What was recovery like?
Going into surgery, I had to establish hope, and that was hard. It took a few hours, but it was actually coming out of surgery when you wake up, and I realised I just couldn't move myself. You just stick to the bed because I'm sweating so much because my body's in such a disarray. Got 3 sets of IV tubes hanging out my right arm, and I think that was so deflating, and actually picking yourself back up that second time, really takes a lot of work. And I think it really helped, maybe again, that leadership type of thinking of, well, yesterday I told myself I was going to have a crack at this. I was going to do these things. I was going to aim it for this sort of recovery. Now's the time to hold yourself to account for those things. What are the little things you can do, and stop focusing on the painful bits and, how difficult it is, but what can you do?
You end up facing 7, 8, 9 weeks in hospital, which is a long time, and then obviously months of rehab. And so how crucial was that day by day, kind of bird by bird, bit by bit sort of approach for you? Because if someone had said to you, okay, you've got 6 months of rehab, no doubt you would have been like, oh my God, I can't do this.
Oh, it would have cracked me. And even if you told me I had 7 weeks in hospital, I don't think, you get through it in the end, but it would have broken me at the very start. I think, just trying not to look too far ahead, not trying to think about how long the journey might be, but just what are the little things I need to do today. And probably it helps in a spinal cord injury sense because they do make it so clear that so much of your progress comes in the initial phase. So, whether it be the vast majority within 6 weeks or 12 weeks, and it varies depending on which specialist talks to you. So I'm just, in my little brain, I'm going, okay, marginal returns and net present value, whatever improvement I make early in this transformation is the most valuable.
Yeah, it's compound interest.
Yeah, compound interest, right?
Yeah.
Just whatever I can do to not go backwards. And so if that's just breathing and not having my lungs get worse through bedside pneumonia or other issues, or just trying to flex my toes, even though I couldn't move them, just try, what do I need to do right now, and try to keep it really simple for myself.
One of the things that always happens when you're in that acute phase of recovery, because you're there permanently, 24 hours, is that you meet this incredible group of therapists, nurses, doctors, the team that kind of comes around you. And one of the physiotherapists was called Andy. Tell me about him.
So I'd actually met Andy 15 odd years before, but I hadn't placed that initially, and he's just my first physio. Just keeping it simple and helping me sit up on the bed to start with, and that was just excruciating pain just to find a way to sit up. But, he'd teach me the technique. He was a big cyclist, very fit guy himself. He'd been through a couple of really big stacks and really big recoveries. So he really could help paint that picture of that it could be done. And he could also level me up at different stages. So, I tend to be more optimistic. That helped me, in recovery. It's a very valuable outlook. But sometimes you just need someone also to make sure that you're not losing sight of the reality. So he would paint the picture that this is possible, but he'd also say things like, Mark, love your enthusiasm that you want to get back to work, this, that, the other, but you need to treat rehabilitation like it's your full-time job for the next year. And you're going to be in maintenance for the rest of your life. And just that ability to be both sides of that equation, I think, is so important when you're supporting someone. You do need to just bring them back to the task at hand, but also paint the hope. And he was so beautiful about doing that.
And how difficult was that for you? Because I think saying to someone who's been a high-flying leader in a big multinational corporation, you've been all around the world, you're used to kind of calling the shots, and you've got that, I talk about the sort of the push-through button that a lot of leaders have. So when everyone else is exhausted and on the floor, there are leaders who have that push-through button where they just go, I'm just going to push through and I can keep going and I can keep going. But then when someone tells you, actually, I need you to stop and I really need you to do nothing else for 12 months, don't even think about work. How tricky was that to sort of readjust in your mind?
Well, completely tricky, because I say it was very valuable, but I still had this element of denial. There's some way I'll get back and do some level of part-time thing within 6 months.
Yeah, it's kind of like, that's advice for someone else, not me.
The reality of the situation, Kelly, is I am not superhuman. I may have flown through the air like Superman, but I know I'm not superhuman. But the sense of, yes, there is some way I'll be just a little bit better than average. But let's not be too flippant about that mindset that I had. That was important. Come back to that comment about statistics. When they were painting a picture on the first day of very limited future mobility, I'm thinking, yep, but that's part of the distribution curve. There is always outliers. The shape of the curve says that there are some better than average results. I'll be finding a way to drive for the better than average results. And so I kept asking questions about what happens, how do these better than average results come? And every time I looked for some help from them or advice around that, I'd get more and more vague answers. They were onto me, right? They had worked out. So I had to actually use that as my friend, right? Okay, I'm pushing for more certainty that if I work harder or there's better outcomes here, and you're being more vague, well, rather than be frustrated by that, that's my friend. How do I imagine and paint my own idea of what could be possible out here? And I thought about amazing people, Carney Liddell, that I'd heard speak before. There are other stories. And what are those other stories? How do I be a bit like that?
So once the initial period is over, you know what's ahead of you. What did the day-to-day of recovery look like? What was the rhythm once you were in hospital? What sort of things did you have to do in order to restore that mobility and ultimately be able to walk again?
So it's evolving as I evolved. So 30 hours after the operation, Andy's just got me up to stand on this rollator and my legs are just shaking below me. Even with all my weight being pushed through this walking frame with wheels on it, I can barely walk a metre to the door and back, and my legs are just going everywhere. My mind no longer knows how to control these legs, right? So then you start to be able to walk a little bit in hospital on the rollator. Maybe I'm walking 50 metres up and down the corridor with 2 physios either side of me on this massive big rolling walking frame. Then they go, okay, we're going to try you in the parallel bars. So by about day 10, try and walk using parallel bars to support myself as I try and use my legs. And eventually get onto crutches and back into more full mobility over the next 6 months. But I had physio with me for an hour a day in the gym. At this stage, I'm at PA Hospital, having moved from Royal Brisbane to PA Hospital on day 12. And I would just spend 3.5 hours a day at the gym. I'd just go there in the morning for an hour and a half with the physio. And the moment that the gym opened again at 1 o'clock, I would be back in there because I was so broken and miserable, and it was so difficult. And the only way I could sort of make peace, I guess, with that difficult situation was if I gave myself the opportunity to do everything possible to drive myself forward, and being in the gym was my solace. Because if all else failed and I made no progress, at the end of my life, I'd be able to look back and go, I gave it my best shot. I got no regrets.
What about in the quiet hours? The gym's open in the day, people are coming to visit you in the day, but there's a point whenever you're in hospital where the ward gets quiet, the nurses stop coming into your room, you're alone with your thoughts in a dark room, essentially. How did that impact you, and what were the things that were going through your mind in those quieter moments?
Everything I'd set my life up for had been taken away from me in some way, and I was just fighting to get some of it back. And I think that was the overarching emotions that I had to keep working through. But my worst moments probably came when I got different sets of news. So the toughest moments for me might have been the specialist just gave me, you will never run again or something. And then I've got to wade through those thoughts. That's probably when I was lowest, but you're also just lonely in hospital and you just want to get home and be able to help the family out and do stuff.
Throughout this accident, even though you've got the positive mindset, of course there are moments where things are bleak, and I'm sure there's moments where, you can't kind of keep up the positive spirit, and your kids witness that. And I know one of your sons in particular noticed. How did it affect them?
That relates back to when I was in hospital in the first week or so, and I thought I was putting on a really positive show. I was certainly trying to. But when my family come in, I would always apologise for the situation, even though it was an accident, because I was having a big impact on them. I guess I still, rose-tinted glasses, saw the overall positive way I handled the situation, which was so powerful. And then 21 months after the accident, my then 13-year-old boy, Charlie, gets asked by a friend, what was the first week like for you? And he just said, Dad, you look so depressed. You're confused about how the accident happened, and you're constantly apologising for letting us down. So it took me a good minute or two to resume the conversation. The conversation was going, but I wasn't in it anymore. But that's the difference, isn't it? Like, he gets to the window of me for just that short period he's there, and that's what stays with him for the periods he's not with me. And obviously I'm trying to use all of those emotions, negative and positive, to drive myself forward just to take the next action.
The other thing I'm curious about in all of this is the tendency for particularly middle-aged men who've had something like this happen to feel guilty about not providing for your family. Clearly your wife is well and truly capable of providing for the family, but there is this moment where you're like, hang on, if I can't walk, I can't work, you can quickly cascade to, I've got the next, hopefully 4 decades ahead of me, but if I can't provide for my family, what does that mean? How much did that play into your psyche?
I think initially I was just so broken. I wasn't even thinking about earning again, although I wanted to go back and work from a mentality perspective. But it was just that sense of being able to travel in retirement, being able to walk my daughter down the aisle if that was in both our futures. They were definitely weighing on me, but also that sense of, will I ever be able to work again? How will I work? Yeah, definitely I was hindered and worried, deeply concerned about this loss of future earning capability, and that therefore taking away, I guess, the opportunities I wanted to have for myself in the future, which, our brain's a predictive machine, right? It'll predict those nastier results, and you can overblow things, and I certainly did a reasonable job of that.
You were told, though, no more running. I presume your wife threw the bike out and said you're never getting back on a bike as well. But then you decide to go for a run. Why? Why, Mark?
Coming back to that sense of identity and wanting to work, and I've started working, and it's a real struggle. I'm so physically fatigued. I had another operation to take these rods out of my back. The rods that went into my back to give me any hope of walking again, they're 23 centimetres long. They're inside me with 62 industrial-sized staples holding my back together. Somehow in my little brain, I go, oh, well, the operation to take them out again is not going to be quite as bad. It was still pretty bad. It took me a while to recover. So all that difficult period of recovery, I go, I need to do something to cheer myself up. I know they told me that I wouldn't run again. I've been doing exercises for, at that stage, 6 to 8 months to learn how to run again. Like I literally would go out and just walk on my tiptoes in the backyard. There's a whole range of pre-running drills, and I'd be doing these every day or second day. I go, right, it's time to rip the Band-Aid off. You're feeling sorry for yourself. Let's go out there and see if we can do something. And yeah, I went out and jogged 1.5 laps around the oval with the EP jogging alongside me just to make sure that if I didn't have any major mishap. It hurt, but it felt good.
And then you decide, look, that's not enough. I also want to focus on a bit more speaking and a bit more writing. So what drew you in that direction?
I decided that I wanted to write something publicly about my situation. Everyone was going through COVID there. Everyone's going through uncertainty. And so I decided that, well, I need to do something. I'll run this lap of the oval. I'll write about how I'm feeling, the overall journey that I've had the last 15 months. I forced myself to read the notes that I'd made on my iPad of the first 6 weeks in hospital, and I just didn't want to open that file and relive it. But I did. And I watched the video of me trying to walk on day 10 in the parallel bars, which was horrific. And all of that made me get an article out there on LinkedIn, and people responded to it. And then people started to say, you should write and speak about this a bit more. And I'm going, but look, pretty normal, because 2/3 of spinal cord injuries might look normal to the average person. We're not in a wheelchair. We are got an invisible disability that makes life and certain things harder. But, I look normal. Who's going to listen? But I started to get some momentum. And, of course, then I'm putting myself into a new vocation and learning the new skill, and having to put myself in the fear of that, because, standing up in front of a work crowd and talking about a work thing's quite different than opening up about all the vulnerabilities and challenges of what was a little bit of a speed bump in the road.
And A Fraction Stronger is the book that you ended up penning. How difficult was the writing process for you? Was it something new? Had you dabbled in that before?
Dabbled in a very light use of the word. So I loved writing poetry and the hockey magazines and the college magazines when I was at university, no doubt with my mum's creativity, and it helped me in my work career, but it was a sideline skill. So to actually go, I'm going to write a book here, just shows that optimism and that sense of possibility, that anything's possible, that mum instilled in me. I loved the process overall. I really loved writing, and I now want to be an author. And, I guess that's one of the many, many beautiful things that's come out of an unlucky moment.
Well, congratulations on A Fraction Stronger, and thanks so much for sharing your story on Curveball.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, Kelly.
That's Mark Berridge, and his book is called A Fraction Stronger. Dead Set Studios recognises the traditional owners of the lands on which this podcast episode was recorded, the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people. This episode was produced by Nicola Brayan. If you head along to curveballshow.com, you can find all sorts of Curveball episodes, including ones with the founder of Adore Beauty, Kate Morris. We've also got interviews with people like Olympic swimmer Bronte Campbell and author Trent Dalton. So check out the archive at curveballshow.com.